The ring was already back in his pocket before I had time to breathe. 1 second I was saying yes, tears blurring the skyline, and the next Julian was straightening his jacket and telling me, calmly, like it was a scheduling request, that I needed to fly to Boston and kneel before his father to prove I was worthy of becoming his wife. I am Lucy Howard, 28 years old, senior software architect at Etheria Solutions, where I spend my days building encryption systems that protect global networks. I have never once needed a man's approval to walk into a room. I was not about to beg for one. When I refused, the version of Julian I had loved for 3 years simply ceased to exist. His face went cold in a way I had never seen before, not hurt, not disappointed, but controlled, calculated. He leaned across that table and told me I had no idea how things worked in his world, that I would fly to Boston, that I would kneel, or I would never see that ring again. He walked out that night with 3 suitcases. 48 hours of silence followed. He thought silence would break me. What it actually did was give me time to think. I went back to work. Long hours, early mornings, the final push on an encryption protocol I had spent 2 years building. And late one evening, running routine diagnostics on the server logs, I found something that turned my blood cold. Someone had been pinging the backdoor access port of my core security software. The IP was masked, but the intrusion pattern was specific. Too specific. It mimicked the exact architecture of my personal work network, the kind of knowledge you only have if you have spent 3 years sitting on my couch watching me code. I went home. Found the tablet he had left behind in his old study, tucked under a stack of magazines. 3 attempts to bypass the lock screen using his mother's birth year. On the 3rd, it opened. The notifications waiting on that screen were not texts from another woman. They were panicked messages discussing margin calls, offshore accounts, and one line that reordered everything I thought I understood about the past 3 years. If Richard does not secure the tech asset by the 30th, the creditors will liquidate the Boston estate. We are $50 million underwater. I read that line twice. Then I picked up my phone and hired the most ruthless corporate private investigator in New York. 3 days later, he slid a manila folder across a diner table and told me Vance Investments was a Ponzi scheme 3 weeks from total collapse and federal indictment. I opened the file. I read every page. The worst was at the back. Buried inside what appeared to be a ceremonial family membership certificate was a legal clause written in archaic jargon that would transfer 100% of the intellectual property rights to my encryption software directly into the Vance family trust as a traditional dowry. They did not want me. They wanted my code. Julian was going to let me kneel before his father, sign my name to that document in a moment of manufactured devotion, and walk away having handed him my life's work to sell to a competitor and cover $50 million of fraud. I went home. I locked the door. I sat on the bathroom floor, and I let myself fall apart completely for exactly 1 hour. When the clock struck midnight, I stood up, walked to the mirror, and looked at myself for a long time. Then I called Julian. I made my voice tremble just enough. Told him I couldn't bear the silence. Told him I was sorry. Told him I would fly to Boston and do the ritual. I could hear the warmth flood back into him immediately, the same warmth that had fooled me for 36 months. As he started painting pictures of a castle wedding in southern France, white doves, vintage champagne, I smiled into the phone until my knuckles turned white. The Vance family manor was exactly what I expected. Gothic stone, iron gates, the particular kind of darkness that old money uses to remind you it's watching. Richard sat at the head of the dinner table like he owned the century. Over the next 2 hours, he made comments about my working-class background, dismissed my career with a wave of his hand, and informed me that once I was a Vance, I would step down from my senior role because a woman's value lay in managing a household and hosting charity galas. I smiled. I kept my expression carefully empty. I let every needle land. When dessert was cleared, the servant appeared with the leather-bound contract. 50 pages. Richard told me to sign it immediately. I picked up the pen. Admired the weight of it. set it gently back down. I told them I was absolutely thrilled to join the family, and that as a senior architect contractually bound by corporate compliance law, I simply could not sign a document of this magnitude without my legal counsel reviewing the asset transfer clauses first. I told them I wanted to make sure the transition went smoothly, without any federal litigation tying it up for years. I dangled the promise of a clean, uncontested acquisition right in front of their greed. Richard studied my face for a long moment. Then his smirk returned. "You have until Wednesday," he said, and turned to pour the scotch. While both men stood with their backs to me, celebrating, I dropped my napkin, reached under the tablecloth, pulled a microscopic data cloning drive from the lining of my heel, and plugged it into the router port I had clocked during dinner. The device began silently pulling every file, email, and hidden ledger on their network. I retrieved my napkin. I accepted a glass of scotch. We toasted to the future. 72 hours, 3 pots of black coffee, an isolated offline sandbox environment, and every custom decryption script I had built over a decade of work. Their internal security was not designed to stop someone who builds the kind of systems they were trying to steal. What I found inside Project Aegis stopped me cold. Julian had not simply been trying to acquire my software as a dowry. For 3 years, using his proximity to me, he had been harvesting confidential data from Etheria's top-tier clients, government contracts, corporate security vulnerabilities, and selling it to our biggest global competitor. Tens of millions of dollars. A pipeline running directly out of my life and into the accounts keeping his father's fraud afloat. And at the back of a subfolder dated 2 weeks before the day Julian and I first met at that coffee shop in Manhattan, a psychological and professional dossier. My daily routines, my vulnerabilities, my projected career trajectory. A detailed strategy to seduce me, build my absolute trust, and marry me before my promotion to Chief Security Director, which would grant him unrestricted access to the company's highest clearance levels. Every trip to Napa Valley, every whispered promise under the stars, a rehearsed script. I was never a girlfriend. I was an extraction target. I sat with that for exactly as long as it took the nausea to pass. Then I started building the deletion protocol. 10 hours. Every piece of evidence, the financial fraud, the corporate espionage, the blackmail infrastructure, organized into encrypted packets and routed anonymously to Etheria's legal department and the FBI cybercrime division simultaneously. Decryption keys locked behind a single remote command only I could trigger. Then I called Julian. Breathless, relieved, overjoyed. I told him my legal team had cleared everything and I was ready to sign. I suggested we do it publicly. A massive engagement party, his father, all the investors, the whole industry watching. His ego did the rest. The ballroom was packed with 300 of the most powerful people in New York. Crystal chandeliers. Vintage champagne. Richard holding court near an ice sculpture, openly boasting about an upcoming merger that was going to double everyone's portfolio. Julian gliding across the marble floor like a man who had already won. I walked in at 8 o'clock in emerald green silk and let them both believe it for a little while longer. At 8:45, I caught the eye of the private security director I had hired at triple rate. One nod. Every exit in the building locked in under 60 seconds. When Richard took the stage to give his speech and summoned me up to sign the contract, I walked to that podium slowly, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. I picked up the contract, held it above my head so the whole room could see it, and tore it straight down the middle. The sound cut through the silence like a shot. I tapped the command on my phone. The display board behind me lit up with offshore bank statements, wire transfer records, and corporate espionage logs, highlighted, dated, and named. The room took approximately 3 seconds to understand what it was looking at. Then it erupted. Julian came for me. He made it 5 feet before 2 former military operatives put him on the marble floor. He hit it with a sound I found deeply satisfying. The main doors opened. Federal agents, 24 of them. Miranda rights read loudly over the screaming of investors pulling out their phones to freeze their assets. Richard's face went the color of ash as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. The media I had tipped off an hour prior flooded in behind the agents, flashbulbs lighting up the faces of both men as they were walked out of the building. I stood at the edge of the stage with my arms crossed and watched them go. Several senior Etheria board members were waiting for me at the bottom of the steps. They started to applaud. I walked out into the cool night air and breathed it in. The next morning, sunlight on the hardwood floors, silk pajamas, dark roast coffee. I opened my laptop and found a formal offer from the CEO of Etheria Solutions, waiting at the top of my inbox. Chief Technology Officer, full creative control over the security division, a compensation package that made the ring Julian had snatched back look like a trinket. I took a slow sip of coffee and smiled at the screen. The chains were gone. The future was entirely mine.